Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the Iron Dragon Slayer. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The cold was a constant companion. It wasn't the brisk chill of a winter morning or the refreshing cool of shade on a summer day. This was a deep, internal cold, a frost that lived in the marrow of Izuku Midoriya's bones and refused to leave. It made him feel hollowed out, as if his insides were made of brittle glass. Doctors had a name for it: chronic anemia, a severe and perplexing iron deficiency. But a name was a poor substitute for warmth. It didn't stop his fingers from turning numb in a perfectly temperate classroom, nor did it quell the persistent fatigue that clung to him like a second skin. He sat at his desk at Aldera Junior High, ostensibly listening to the teacher drone on about pre-quirk history, but his focus was elsewhere. It was on the gnawing, restless emptiness in his stomach. He'd eaten a full breakfast that morning: rice, miso soup, grilled fish, everything his worried mother insisted upon, but the hunger was back, as it always was. It wasn't the simple hunger for food. It was a specific, bizarre craving, a phantom taste that haunted his palate, the sharp, clean tang of metal. His fingers, betraying his conscious thought, found the plastic pen on his desk. He brought the end to his mouth, his teeth closing around it. The cheap plastic yielded with a soft crunch. He chewed, the motion subconscious and comforting. It wasn't right, the texture was too soft, and the taste was a bland chemical ghost. But it was the closest he could get. "Still eating garbage, Deku?" The voice, sharp and crackling like a string of firecrackers, sliced through his concentration. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair one row over, a cruel smirk plastered on his face. His two cronies snickered on cue. Izuku flinched, pulling the mangled pen from his mouth. "Kaken, seriously, it's disgusting," Bakugo continued, his voice loud enough for the surrounding students to hear. "First it was your fingernails, then paper clips. Now you're trying to eat the damn school supplies. What's wrong with you? Are you a goat?" Laughter rippled through the nearby desks. Izuku's face burned with a familiar, hot shame. He wanted to say something, to defend himself, but the words caught in the back of his throat. What could he say? "Sorry, I have a medical condition that makes me crave inorganic materials?" It would only give them more ammunition. Bakugo's crimson eyes narrowed. "On top of being a quirkless loser, you're a goddamn freak. You even smell weird. Like old pipes and rust." That one stung more than the rest. It was true. No matter how much he showered, no matter how much deodorant he used, there was a faint, almost imperceptible metallic scent that clung to his skin and clothes. His mother said she couldn't smell it, but Izuku could. And apparently, so could Bakugo. The final bell shrieked, saving him from further humiliation. Izuku packed his bag with trembling hands, keeping his head down. His goal was simple: get out of the classroom, get out of the school, and get home before Bakugo decided he wasn't finished. He almost made it. "Oh, Deku!" Izuku froze, his hand on the doorframe. He turned slowly. Bakugo was standing by his desk, holding up a notebook with a singed, familiar cover. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Izuku's blood ran even colder than usual. Please give it back, Kaken. Hero Analysis for the Future?" Bakugo read the title with mocking contempt. He flipped through the pages, his cronies peering over his shoulder. "You're still doing this crap? It's pathetic. You're quirkless. You really think you can be a hero?" Before Izuku could answer, Bakugo slammed the notebook between his palms. A small, sharp explosion erupted. Boom, charring the cover and sending a puff of acrid smoke into the air. Izuku cried out, a pathetic, wounded sound. "You know," Bakugo said conversationally as he walked towards the open window. "If you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it." He tossed the notebook out. It fluttered for a moment before splashing into the koi pond below. "Go take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life." The world fell silent. The air crackled with the ghost of Bakugo's explosion and the weight of his words. Izuku stood, paralyzed, his body shaking uncontrollably. He saw the smirks on the faces of Bakugo's friends, the way Bakugo's shoulders were squared with arrogant pride as he walked away, a final, threatening glare thrown over his shoulder. For a long moment, Izuku didn't move. He just stared at the spot where his tormentor had stood, the cruel words echoing in his ears. It wasn't the physical threats that hurt. It was the complete, utter dismissal of his entire existence. To Bakugo, he wasn't a person. He was an obstacle, an annoyance, a thing to be crushed on the path to greatness. He eventually retrieved his soaked, blackened notebook from the pond, the ink of his meticulous drawings and notes bleeding into blurry, unrecognizable shapes. The fish nibbled at the edges, as if tasting the ashes of his dream. Holding the ruined book, Izuku felt the last vestiges of his strength drain away. The cold in his bones deepened, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. The hunger was back, stronger than ever, a howling void in his core. He leaned against the school wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths, trying to will the world to stop spinning. The path home took him under a dark, grimy underpass. The cool, damp air was a small relief against his flushed skin. He clutched his notebook to his chest, his mind a maelstrom of despair. Maybe Kaken is right. Maybe I am just a useless, quirkless Deku. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't hear the gurgling sound from the manhole cover behind him until it was too late. A monstrous, sentient wave of green sludge erupted from the sewer, its two large, yellow eyes swiveling in their sockets. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. Perfect! The villainous slime rasped. Izuku's blood turned to ice. Before he could even scream, the sludge lunged. It was like being hit by a tidal wave of suffocating mud. The foul-smelling liquid forced its way into his mouth and nose, filling his lungs. It was thick, cloying, and inescapable. He clawed at the mass, his fingers sinking into the gelatinous body with no effect. Can't breathe. Panic, white-hot and absolute, seized him. His body thrashed, desperate for oxygen. His vision started to swim, black spots dancing at the edges. My body, getting weak. I'm dying. He was going to die here, in a dirty underpass, suffocating inside a villain made of sewage. No one would even know. His last thought would be Bakugo's sneering face. No. Somebody, help. Suddenly, the manhole cover he just passed shot into the air like a cannonball, clanging against the concrete ceiling. A booming, familiar voice echoed through the tunnel, a sound Izuku had only ever heard on TV and in his dreams. Have no fear, you are safe! For I am here! A colossal figure stood silhouetted against the bright entrance of the underpass. It was him. The #1 hero. All Might. Texas Smash! All Might's fist shot forward. It didn't even connect with the villain. The sheer air pressure from the punch was a physical force, a hurricane that blasted the sludge villain apart. The suffocating pressure on Izuku vanished, and he was thrown back against the wall, gasping, coughing, and finally able to drag precious, life-giving air into his burning lungs. His vision was blurry, but he could see All Might, his iconic smile radiating an almost divine power, scooping the scattered remnants of the villain into an empty soda bottle. Thought we lost you there. All Might boomed, giving Izuku a hearty pat on the shoulder that nearly sent him sprawling again. Excellent work holding on. Izuku's mind was short-circuiting. All Might. The All Might. Here. In front of him. He'd saved him. He needed an autograph. Where was his notebook? It was on the ground. He fumbled for it, flipping it open to a clean page. Please, an autograph. He stammered, bowing repeatedly. Of course, my boy. All Might uncapped a pen and signed with a flourish. There you go. Well, I must be off. Villains to catch, justice to be served. He crouched, muscles tensing for a spectacular leap. Wait. Izuku's voice was a desperate squeak. He had to ask. This was his one chance, the only chance he might ever get. He had to know. The question that had defined his entire life. The question that Bakugo had so cruelly answered just an hour before. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? All Might was already in the air. Izuku didn't even think. In a move of pure, unadulterated desperation, he leaped and grabbed onto All Might's leg. Whoa, hey now! Let go! I love my fans, but this is a bit much. All Might yelled over the roaring wind. If I let go, I'll die. Izuku shrieked, his arms wrapped around the hero's muscular calf for dear life. Oh. Right. All Might looked down, a bead of sweat on his brow. Okay, just close your eyes and mouth. They landed roughly on the roof of a nearby department store. Izuku's legs felt like jelly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. All Might stood at the edge of the roof, looking annoyed. That was incredibly reckless, young man. You could have been killed. I have a schedule to keep. Just knock on the door downstairs, and someone will let you out. He turned to leave. Wait! Izuku cried out, the words tumbling from his lips in a rush. My whole life, I've been told I can't be a hero. I don't have a quirk, not even a small one. I get bullied, and everyone tells me it's impossible. But seeing you always save people with a smile, no matter how bad things are. You're the greatest, so I have to know, can someone like me, can a quirkless boy ever hope to be someone like you? He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hope. He needed to hear it. He needed All Might, the symbol of peace, to tell him that Bakugo was wrong, that everyone was wrong. All Might stopped. He turned, and Izuku saw something flicker in his eyes. The hero sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed completely out of character. Being a hero is a dangerous business, kid, he said, his voice losing its booming quality. We risk our lives every day. Fights with villains, rescue operations, natural disasters, it's not a game. He looked Izuku up and down, taking in his skinny frame, his trembling posture. So no. I honestly don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. The words hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis, the sounds of the city fading into a dull, meaningless roar. It was one thing to hear it from bullies, from doctors, from the pitying looks of his teachers. It was another thing entirely to hear it from his idol, the very person who had inspired his dream. It's good to have dreams, young man, All Might said, his voice softening with a touch of pity. But you need to be realistic. Suddenly, All Might was engulfed in a cloud of steam. Izuku blinked, and where the mountain of muscle had stood, there was now a skeletal, emaciated man with hollowed-out eyes and shaggy blonde hair. He coughed, and a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth. Izuku could only stare, his own despair momentarily forgotten in the face of this shocking transformation. All Might, or the man who claimed to be him, lifted his shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that covered the left side of his torso. 5 years ago, the man rasped, his voice a ghost of its former self. A nasty fight with a villain did this to me. Lost my stomach. My respiratory system is a wreck. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. What you see on TV, that's just me flexing, running on fumes. He let his shirt fall. This is the reality, kid. Even for me, the symbol of peace, it's a constant battle. A quirkless person wouldn't stand a chance. They'd be a liability. He offered a final piece of advice, his words meant to be kind but feeling like shovelfuls of dirt on a freshly dug grave. If you want to help people, you can become a police officer. They get a lot of flack for not being able to handle villains directly, but it's a fine and respectable profession. He turned and walked towards the stairwell door, his footsteps echoing in the crushing silence. Don't go telling anyone about this, okay? The door clicked shut, leaving Izuku alone on the roof. He sank to his knees, the concrete cold and unfeeling beneath him. It was over. The dream he had clung to for a decade, the one thing that gave his difficult life meaning, was dead, and All Might himself had been the one to kill it. The cold in his bones flared, consuming him completely. For the first time, Izuku felt truly, utterly empty. He walked home in a daze, his feet moving on autopilot. The city was a blur of sound and color that he couldn't process. He didn't even notice the commotion down the street until he was right in the middle of it. The crowds, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, the distant shouts of pro-heroes. An explosion rocked the narrow alleyway, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the sky. Izuku's head snapped up. That explosion, he knew that smell. Acrid nitroglycerin. He pushed his way through the crowd, his heart beginning to pound with a new, dawning horror. There, in the alley, was the sludge villain. The one All Might caught. Izuku's hand went to his own pocket, then to All Might's. The soda bottle must have fallen out when he'd grabbed onto his leg. This was his fault. The villain was thrashing wildly, a tangled mess of heroes, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Empty Lady, held at bay. Kamui was useless against the fluid opponent, and Empty Lady was too big for the narrow street. Death Arms was trying to land a punch, but his fists just sank into the muck. And in the center of the swirling green mass, a figure was struggling, explosions erupting from their hands in desperate, panicked bursts. It was Bakugo. The sludge villain had him, just as it had held Izuku. Bakugo was fighting back with everything he had, but he was suffocating. His eyes, wide with terror and rage, met Izuku's for a fleeting second. For the first time in his life, Izuku didn't see a bully or a rival. He saw someone who was scared, someone who needed help. The pro-heroes were shouting, trying to formulate a plan, waiting for someone with the right quirk. The crowd was murmuring, some filming on their phones, others looking on in horror, and Izuku's legs started moving. He didn't know why. All Might's words were still echoing in his head. Be realistic. You can't be a hero. He had no plan. He had no power. He was a skinny, anemic, quirkless kid running toward a battle that seasoned professionals couldn't win. It was suicide, but his feet kept running. He saw Bakugo's desperate eyes, and a page from his analysis notebook flashed in his mind. The sludge villain's true body is vulnerable. If you can hit the eyes. He unslung his backpack, his mind working faster than it ever had before. He swung it with all his might, aiming for the villain's face. The bag hit its mark, a textbook flying out and smacking one of the large yellow eyes. The villain roared in pain, its grip on Bakugo loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Izuku was there, clawing at the sludge, trying to dig Bakugo out. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? Bakugo choked out, his voice a mix of fury and desperation. I don't know. Izuku sobbed, his fingers scrabbling uselessly at the slime. My legs they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die, Kaken. This was it. The villain, enraged, reared back, its fluid body forming a massive pseudopod to crush the insignificant gnat that was causing it so much trouble. Death was coming for him. The heroes were too far away. All Might wasn't here. There was no one left to save them. A primal scream of terror and desperation ripped through Izuku's throat. It was a scream born of a lifetime of helplessness, of being told he was worthless, of seeing his only friend about to be extinguished before his eyes. It was a scream against the cold in his bones, against the gnawing hunger in his soul, against the universe that had declared him unfit. And something answered. Deep within him, in that hollow, cold place where his quirk should have been, an ancient, dormant ember flickered to life. It was a furnace, long cold, suddenly blasted with a gallon of gasoline. A searing heat, painful and utterly alien, flooded his system. It felt like swallowing a mouthful of hot gravel and molten steel. A pressure built in his chest, in his throat, a force that demanded to be released. The scream changed. It became a ragged, grating shriek, the sound of metal tearing itself apart. He opened his mouth, and it wasn't just sound that came out. A spray of tiny, razor-sharp, dark gray particles shot from his throat like a shotgun blast. They weren't powerful, they weren't a focused beam, but they were real. They peppered the sludge villain's face, hundreds of minuscule metal shards embedding themselves in its gelatinous eyes and body. The villain howled, a sound of pure agony, flinching back violently from the unexpected assault. At the same time, a strange, shimmering pattern flickered across Izuku's skin, most noticeably on his arms and cheeks. For a barest instant, his flesh took on the appearance of dark, overlapping iron scales before fading back to normal. The world swam before his eyes, the effort leaving him dizzy and gasping. He hadn't just screamed. He had done something. Something impossible. That momentary distraction was all the opening a true hero needed. I really am pathetic. Izuku looked up. All Might, in his full, heroic form, was there. He had a hand on Izuku's shoulder, pulling him back. I told you about the qualities that make a hero, All Might said, his voice filled with a mixture of shame and renewed vigor. But I wasn't living up to my own ideals. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. With a mighty roar, All Might grabbed Bakugo's arm and planted his feet. Detroit. Smash! His punch struck the villain with the force of a meteor. The sludge creature atomized, and the shockwave was so powerful it changed the weather, a sudden downpour of rain washing the alley clean. Afterward, it was chaos. The heroes swarmed them, first scolding Izuku for his recklessness, then praising his bravery. Bakugo was checked over by paramedics, receiving praise for his powerful quirk and his endurance. Izuku just stood there, soaked to the bone, his mind numb, the strange heat in his body slowly fading back to the familiar, deep-seated cold. He could still feel the phantom sensation of scales on his skin, the ghost of gravel in his throat. He started the walk home again, his mind a total blank. He didn't know what to think, what to feel. He had been useless. He had been a hero. He was quirkless. He had a quirk. All Might had crushed his dream. All Might had saved him. The contradictions were tearing him apart. DKU! He turned. Bakugo was running to catch up, his face a mask of complex emotions Izuku couldn't decipher. I never asked you to save me, he snarled, though it lacked its usual bite. I could have handled that myself. You got it? I don't owe you anything. You quirkless wannabe. He spun around and stalked off, his shoulders rigid. Izuku watched him go. It was Bakugo's way of saying thank you, he supposed. But his parting words echoed. Quirkless. But was he? What was that thing that had happened? The metal shards? The scales? It felt more like a seizure than a superpower. A one-time fluke born of pure adrenaline. It had to be. I am here! Izuku yelped as All Might, in his muscular form, zipped around the corner, coming to a dramatic halt in front of him. All Might? What are you doing here? You were swarmed by reporters. Ha! Shaking them off is but a simple feat for me, he boomed, before promptly deflating in a cloud of steam, reverting to his skeletal form and spitting a truly heroic amount of blood. Kid, the emaciated hero said, wiping his mouth. I came here to thank you. And to apologize. And to make a proposal. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. Earlier today, I told you that you couldn't be a hero. But then I saw you, a timid, quirkless boy, jump into action when all the other pros, myself included, were standing by. You moved before you had time to think. He leaned in, his hollow eyes intense. Every great hero has a story about their origins. Almost all of them have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think, almost on their own. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes, hot and sudden. That's what happened to you back there, wasn't it? Izuku could only nod, choking on a sob. But there's something else. All Might said, his expression turning serious, analytical. When you were in the villain's grasp, you screamed. But it wasn't just a scream. I saw it. Shrapnel. Metal. It came from you. Your skin, it shimmered. Tell me, young man. What is your quirk? The question hung in the air. Izuku shook his head, the confusion and turmoil of the day finally overflowing. I don't know, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm quirkless. The doctors, everyone said so. I've never done anything like that before. I've always been sick. The doctors say I have chronic anemia, an iron deficiency they can't explain. I'm always tired, always cold. He hesitated, ashamed. I chew on things. Metal things. I don't know why. All Might listened intently, a strange light dawning in his eyes. He put a bony hand on his chin, his mind clearly working. Quirkless, or perhaps misdiagnosed, he murmured, more to himself than to Izuku. A quirk that lies dormant, one that requires a specific, extreme trigger to manifest. It's rare, exceedingly rare. These types of quirks are often primal, elemental, hard to control, and they often come with strange biological demands. He looked straight at Izuku, his gaze piercing. That power you used today, that was your own. It came from inside you. It was raw, untamed, and it burst out of you because the heart of a true hero demanded it. He straightened up, and though he was a shadow of his heroic self, his presence filled the street. Young man, you have the heart. And it seems you have the power, even if you don't know it yet. You rescued me today. You reminded me what it means to be a hero. He took a deep breath. I have been searching for a long time for someone worthy. Someone to carry on my legacy. Izuku's heart stopped. Is he going to offer me his quirk? But your path is different. All Might continued, shattering that assumption. You are not an empty vessel waiting to be filled. You are a forge, with a fire inside that has only just been lit. A power like yours, it could be a terrible weapon in the wrong hands. But with a heroic spirit to guide it, it could be something truly special. The setting sun cast long shadows down the street, bathing them in orange and gold. All Might looked at Izuku, not with the pity of their first rooftop meeting, but with a profound, serious respect. You said you wanted to be a hero. You have the two most important ingredients, a hero's soul and a power all your own. But they are both raw, unrefined. You need to be trained. You need to learn to control that dragon sleeping inside you, to temper your will until it is as strong and unyielding as the very iron you command. He extended a hand. It was thin and bony, but to Izuku, it felt like the strongest thing in the world. Young Midoriya, you can become a hero. And I will help you. Izuku stared at the outstretched hand, then at the face of his lifelong idol. The tears he'd been holding back finally broke free, streaming down his cheeks in hot, silent trails. The cold that had lived in his bones for as long as he could remember seemed to recede, chased away by a new, unfamiliar warmth. It was hope. He reached out his own trembling hand and took All Might's. No, All Might said, a faint glimmer of his famous smile returning to his tired face. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything. I think we need to talk. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, but a pale, pre-dawn light painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. It illuminated the grotesque silhouette of Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, a place that had long ago surrendered its natural beauty to the city's neglect. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled nests of rebar, and generations of forgotten refuse formed a jagged, artificial coastline. The air was thick with the competing smells of salt, decay, and rusted metal. It was here, amidst the wreckage, that Izuku Midoriya's new life was set to begin. He stood beside the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi, who, even in his diminished state, possessed an aura of undeniable authority. The man who was All Might surveyed the monumental junkyard with a grim expression. This is it, my boy, Toshinori said, his voice a low rasp in the quiet morning. This place is a scar on the face of our city. For years, illegal dumping has turned a once beautiful shoreline into this testament to societal apathy. Heroes these days are too focused on flashy villain takedowns to engage in this kind of community service. It's unglamorous. He turned his hollowed eyes to Izuku. This will be your training ground, your gym, and your first act as a hero. You are going to restore this entire coastline. Izuku stared at the seemingly endless landscape of trash. He saw refrigerators stacked like fallen monoliths, cars half buried in the sand, and a chaotic labyrinth of broken furniture and electronics stretching as far as the eye could see. The scale of the task was so immense it felt less like a challenge and more like a cruel joke. All of it? He stammered, the cold morning air making his breath mist. All of it, Toshinori confirmed. In 10 months. That's when the UA entrance exam is held. This isn't just about cleaning, young Midoriya. This is about forging your body. Your quirk, whatever it may be, erupted from you under extreme duress. That tells me it's powerful, primal, and deeply connected to your physical and emotional state. A weak vessel cannot hope to contain such a force. If you had been stronger, you might have been able to control it. Instead, it just burst out. He handed Izuku a thick, stapled packet of paper. On the front, in bold English lettering, were the words, American Dream Plan. This is a custom training regimen I designed just for you, Toshinori explained. It details everything, your workout schedule, sleep patterns, dietary needs, every aspect of your life for the next 10 months. It will be hell. Follow it to the letter, and your body will be ready for UA. But that's only half the battle. He pointed a long, bony finger at Izuku's chest. The other half is in there. We need to understand the beast you've woken. We need to learn what it eats, how to command it, and how to keep it from consuming you. Your body and your quirk must be trained in tandem. Your task is to clear this beach. How you do it is up to you. Push your body. Push your quirk. Find your limits, and then shatter them. With that, he gestured to a particularly large, rust-covered refrigerator. Now start with that. For the first month, it was pure, unadulterated misery. The American Dream Plan was relentless, a grueling cycle of hauling, lifting, and dragging that left Izuku's muscles screaming in protest. Every morning, he'd wake before dawn, his body aching with a profound weariness that went beyond simple soreness. The deep, familiar cold in his bones seemed to intensify with the exertion. His anemia, or whatever it was, made every task twice as hard. He managed to drag a washing machine a few feet before collapsing, his vision swimming with black spots, his lungs burning for air. Toshinori was a harsh but fair taskmaster. He pushed Izuku relentlessly but also ensured he didn't permanently injure himself. He'd shout encouragement from atop a pile of junk, occasionally transforming into his muscle form for a few seconds to demonstrate proper lifting technique, a flash of inspiration that always managed to reignite Izuku's flagging spirits. But the quirk remained silent. Every day, they tried to coax it out. Izuku would stand before a pile of debris, close his eyes, and try to replicate the feeling he'd had in that alley. He focused on his desperation, his fear for Bakugo, the primal scream that had torn from his throat. Nothing. He'd concentrate until his head pounded, his face turning red with strain, but the most he could produce was a dry cough and the faint, coppery taste of blood in his mouth. "It's no good, All Might," he gasped one afternoon, slumped against a stack of bald tires. He had spent the last hour trying to manifest the scales he'd seen on his skin. He'd punched a rusted car door until his knuckles were raw and bleeding, hoping the impact might trigger a defensive reaction. The only result was a swollen, useless hand. "I can't do it. Maybe it was just a one-time thing." A hysterical reaction. Toshinori, sitting on a broken-down couch and timing Izuku's rest period, shook his head. "No. I saw it. It was real. A quirk is a part of your biology, like a muscle. When you're born, you don't know how to walk or talk. You have the potential, the hardware is there, but you have to learn how to use it. Your quirk is a muscle you've never used before. You flexed it once by accident, and now it's dormant again. We just have to find the right way to stimulate it." But each failed attempt drained Izuku more than the physical labor. It was a deep, systemic drain, as if trying to access the power was siphoning the very energy from his cells. After a quirk training session, the cold would be so intense he'd shiver uncontrollably even under the hot sun. The hunger would become a ravenous, aching void in his stomach. He'd devour the massive bento boxes his mother lovingly prepared for him, but the hunger would remain, unsatisfied and specific. The second month bled into the third, and despair began to set in. His body was changing, the grueling labor slowly carving lean, wiry muscle onto his once scrawny frame. He could now drag the refrigerator that had been his first challenge, albeit with agonizing effort. But his core problem remained. He was constantly exhausted, perpetually cold, and his mysterious power was as elusive as ever. He was getting stronger, but he felt like he was hollowing out from the inside. One sweltering afternoon in his 4th month of training, he hit his lowest point. His task was to move a massive, tangled mass of I-beams and concrete, the remains of a demolished building. He strained against the weight, his muscles screaming, his joints popping. He dug his feet into the sand, his face a mask of exertion. The metal wouldn't budge. "Come on, young Midoriya!" All Might's voice boomed from a safe distance. "Focus! Channel that energy! This is where heroes are made!" Izuku roared with effort, putting every ounce of his being into the push. He felt a familiar, faint flicker deep within his chest, a spark of the strange heat he'd felt before. He tried to seize it, to fan it into a flame. Come on, he pleaded internally. The spark died. A wave of profound weakness washed over him, so sudden and absolute that his legs gave out. He collapsed into the sand, the world spinning. The cold was back with a vengeance, a glacial frost creeping through his veins. The hunger wasn't just a craving anymore. It was a physical pain, a clawing emptiness that made him want to retch. I can't, he wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. He was done. He had given it everything. For months, he had worked until he bled, pushed until he collapsed, and he was no closer to his goal. He was a failure. A quirkless, useless Deku with a phantom power he couldn't grasp. He was going to die here, on this garbage heap, having achieved nothing. Tears of frustration and exhaustion streamed down his dirty face, mixing with the sweat and sand. He lay there, defeated, his cheek pressed against the grimy, sun-warmed ground. His gaze fell upon a piece of rusted rebar half buried beside his head, and the craving became an overwhelming, undeniable command. It wasn't a thought. It was a primal, biological imperative that bypassed his conscious mind entirely. His body, starved and desperate for a fuel it couldn't name, acted on its own. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, his movements sluggish and dazed. He reached out, his trembling fingers closing around the rough, oxidized metal. He lifted it to his mouth. Toshinori, seeing the boy's strange behavior, started to get up. "Young Midoriya? What are you doing? Don't put that in your mouth, it's filthy." Izuku didn't hear him. He was operating on pure, desperate instinct. He bit down. There was a loud, sharp crunch. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sickening crack of shattering teeth. It was the sound of rock being crushed. A jolt shot up his jaw, but there was no pain. He had bitten clean through the quarter-inch thick steel rod. A piece of metal, coarse and gritty with rust, sat on his tongue. And the taste, it was indescribable. It wasn't the coppery flavor of blood he associated with metal. It was elemental. It was the taste of the earth's core, of raw minerals and latent power. It was the most satisfying, most incredible thing he had ever tasted in his life. As he swallowed, a miracle happened. A wave of intense, wonderful warmth radiated from his stomach, spreading through his chest, down his arms and legs, all the way to his fingertips and toes. It was a profound, invigorating heat that chased away the deep, persistent cold for the first time in his memory. The crushing fatigue vanished, replaced by a surge of vibrant energy. The world, which had been gray and swimming at the edges, snapped back into sharp, brilliant focus. He felt whole. He felt alive. He stared at the bitten rebar in his hand, then looked at his other hand, flexing his fingers. The power wasn't just a vague feeling of wellness. It was a tangible force humming just beneath his skin. The dormant furnace inside him wasn't just lit, it was roaring to life. Toshinori had frozen mid-stride, his jaw slack with utter disbelief. "Did you just eat that?" Izuku looked up at his mentor, his eyes wide with a dawning, revolutionary understanding. He took the rebar and, with deliberate intent this time, took another bite. Crunch. He chewed the piece of solid steel as if it were a pretzel stick and swallowed. The warmth intensified, the energy coiling in his gut like a tangible thing. "All might," Izuku said, his voice clear and stronger than it had been all day. I think I know what my quirk eats." He wasn't iron deficient. His body didn't lack iron, it consumed it. His quirk was a biological engine that ran on metal, and for 15 years, he had been trying to run it on empty. The chronic fatigue, the cold, the strange cravings, it all made a horrifying, perfect sense. Toshinori slowly approached, looking from the rebar to Izuku's face and back again. He was a man who had seen countless bizarre quirks in his career, but this was something else entirely. "Your quirk, its metabolic requirement is ferrous metals?" he mused, the scientist in him overriding the initial shock. "Incredible. The reason you couldn't activate it at will was because you had no fuel in the tank. The sludge villain incident, the sheer adrenaline must have forced your body to metabolize the trace amounts of iron in your own blood, triggering a burst of power but leaving you severely depleted. It was a last-ditch survival mechanism." Izuku nodded, his mind racing. He looked back at the tangled mass of I-beams that had defeated him just moments earlier. He felt different now. Strong. He walked over to it, placing his hands on the cool steel. He closed his eyes, not to strain, but to focus the new energy thrumming within him. He remembered the feeling from the alley, the grating sensation in his throat. He took a deep breath, opened his mouth, and focused that energy. Iron Dragon's roar! It was no longer a pathetic spray of dust. A controlled, focused blast of metallic shrapnel erupted from his mouth, shimmering like a swarm of angry hornets. It shot across the sand and slammed into a rusted-out washing machine 20 feet away, riddling its surface with hundreds of small, deep punctures. The sound was like 1,000 nails being fired from a nail gun at once. Izuku coughed, the back of his throat raw, but he was standing. He wasn't dizzy. He wasn't exhausted. He felt a slight dip in his energy reserves, but the furnace was still burning bright. He turned to All Might, a grin of pure, unadulterated joy spreading across his face. I did it! Toshinori's skeletal face broke into a wide, proud smile. Yes, you did, my boy. Yes, you did. Now, let's see what else you can do. The next 6 months were a revelation. The training transformed from a grueling chore into an exciting, explosive period of discovery. The American Dream Plan was revised. Now, alongside his physical conditioning, were hours dedicated to quirk experimentation and control. Dagoba Beach was not just his gym. It was now his laboratory and his pantry. Their first experiments were in metallurgy. With Toshinori's guidance, and a significant chunk of his private funds, they procured various metals and alloys. Izuku quickly learned that not all metals were created equal. Cheap, rust-pocked scrap metal was like junk food. It provided a quick burst of energy but left him feeling sluggish. High-carbon steel, on the other hand, was like a protein-rich steak, providing sustained power and a feeling of solidity. Titanium was light and efficient, excellent for speed. Tungsten was dense and powerful, perfect for defensive abilities. His mother, Inko, nearly fainted when he explained his new dietary needs. After a long, tearful, and utterly confusing conversation, she finally accepted it, her maternal worry manifesting in a new, bizarre form of cooking. His bento boxes were no longer filled with rice and fish, but with neatly organized compartments of iron filings, for seasoning, ball bearings, as snacks, and small, high-purity ingots of steel that Toshinori supplied. With a consistent fuel source, mastering his quirk became a matter of practice and imagination. The Iron Dragon's roar was his first and most intuitive technique. He learned to control the spread and density of the shrapnel, turning it from a wide, shotgun-like blast into a narrow, armor-piercing stream. He rediscovered the Iron Dragon's scales by accident. While trying to bench press a car axle, his grip slipped. As the heavy bar fell towards his chest, instinct took over. A shimmering, gunmetal gray layer of overlapping scales materialized over his torso and arms. The axle clanged against his chest with a loud, metallic gong, bouncing off without leaving so much as a bruise. He learned to summon the scales at will, coating parts of his body or his entire form in a flexible, durable biological armor. It was heavy and drained his energy quickly, but its defensive potential was immense. From the scales, the Iron Dragon's club was born. Instead of a thin, defensive layer, he learned to concentrate the metal into a thick, crude gauntlet around one arm, turning his fist into a bludgeoning weapon. He shattered concrete blocks with it, smashed through car doors, and pulverized old appliances. It was brutish and unrefined, but devastatingly effective. This became the cornerstone of his new fighting style, a close-quarters brawling method born from months of smashing junk. He wasn't a graceful fighter. He was a demolition machine. The training montage was a blur of steel and sweat. Mornings were spent on the American Dream Plan, his newly energized body responding rapidly, packing on lean, dense muscle. Afternoons were for quirk practice, turning sections of the beach into his personal impact zones. He'd consume a calculated amount of scrap metal, then unleash his techniques on the larger pieces of trash, breaking them down into more manageable chunks. He was no longer just hauling trash. He was pulverizing it, shredding it, and conquering it. He developed a symbiotic relationship with the beach. The very junk that represented his Herculean task was also the fuel that allowed him to complete it. He was literally consuming his obstacle, turning it into the power he needed to overcome it. Toshinori watched it all, no longer just a coach but a proud mentor. He guided Izuku's combat training, teaching him to integrate his brawling style with strategy and tactical awareness. He taught him how to think like a hero, to analyze his opponent, and to use his environment. "Your power is not subtle, young Midoriya," he said one evening, as they watched the sunset over a coastline that was now visibly, dramatically clearer. It is the power of the anvil and the forge. It is loud. It is destructive. It is enduring. You must learn to control it, to wield it with the precision of a surgeon, not just the force of a sledgehammer. Your will must be the hammer that shapes the iron of your quirk. The final day of the 10-month period arrived. The sun rose, just as it had on the first day, but this time it illuminated a scene of breathtaking beauty. Dagoba Beach was pristine. The sand was clean, stretching in a golden crescent to meet the sparkling blue water. The only thing left was the single pickup truck they had used to haul away the last of the non-metal refuse. Izuku stood at the water's edge, the gentle waves lapping at his feet. He was transformed. The scrawny, hollowed-out boy was gone, replaced by a young man who stood with a quiet, solid confidence. His frame was lean but powerful, his arms and shoulders corded with the muscle of a gymnast. His green eyes, once perpetually clouded with doubt, were clear and sharp. The cold was a distant memory, replaced by the constant, low-level warmth of the furnace that now burned steadily within him. In a satchel slung over his shoulder were his snacks for the upcoming exam, a few carefully selected bars of high-carbon steel. Toshinori, in his muscle form, appeared atop the seawall. He took a picture of Izuku on his phone before deflating with a sigh. "Magnificent work, young Midoriya," he said, his voice thick with pride. "You did it. You took a symbol of neglect and turned it back into a thing of beauty. You have a long way to go, but you have taken the first, most important step." He walked over and placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "I am not giving you a power. I did not make you a hero. You had the power inside you all along. You had the heart. All I did was provide the opportunity. You are the one who did the work. You hammered your own body into shape. You learned to stoke the flames of your own soul. You earned this. Your place at UA, your future, it will be built by your own hands, with your own will of iron." Izuku looked from the clean beach to his mentor's proud face, and a feeling of profound gratitude washed over him. He had done it. He had faced an impossible task and conquered it. The dragon inside him was no longer a terrifying, unknown monster. It was a part of him, a source of strength he could command. He turned his gaze towards the distant skyline, in the direction of UA High School. The entrance exam was in a few hours. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. He wasn't hoping for a miracle. He was ready. He was going to be a hero. The main gate of UA High School was less a gate and more a monument. It towered over Izuku, a grand blue-tinted archway that seemed to scrape the sky, a symbol of everything he had ever dreamed of. For years, he had only seen it in pictures, a distant citadel of heroism that felt as unreachable as the moon. Now, standing before it, he could feel the faint thrum of energy from the campus beyond, the air electric with the hopes and ambitions of thousands of examinees. He took a deep, steadying breath. 10 months ago, he would have been a trembling, insignificant speck at the foot of this monument, crushed by the weight of his own perceived inadequacy. Today, he was different. The change was not just in the lean, wiry muscle that now defined his frame, a physical testament to the mountains of trash he had conquered. It was deeper. The chronic, bone-deep cold that had been his constant companion for 15 years was gone, replaced by a low, steady warmth that emanated from his core. It was the pilot light of the furnace inside him, a quiet hum of potential waiting for fuel. He clutched the strap of the heavy-duty canvas satchel slung over his shoulder. It clinked softly, a reassuring sound. Inside, nestled amongst his pencils and exam registration, were his snacks, several dense, high-carbon steel ingots, each wrapped in cloth to prevent them from grinding against each other. They were his emergency rations, his power source. The thought brought a new kind of confidence, one that was still shaky and unfamiliar, but solid and real. He wasn't quirkless anymore. He was armed. "I can do this," he murmured, his voice a low thrum of conviction. He took his first step towards his future, and immediately tripped over his own feet. Years of ingrained clumsiness and social anxiety were not so easily exorcised. He pitched forward, a startled yelp escaping his lips, his hands flailing as the pavement rushed up to meet his face. This was it. His grand entrance to UA would be a face plant, but the impact never came. He stopped, suspended in midair, a strange, light sensation enveloping him. "Whoa there!" Are you okay? A girl's voice, bright and cheerful, pulled him from his stupor. He looked over his shoulder to see a girl with a round, friendly face and a brown bob haircut. Her fingers were pressed together, and a faint pink aura surrounded him. Her quirk. It would be a bad omen to fall on the first day, wouldn't it? She said with a giggle, gently setting him back on his feet. Release! The floating sensation vanished. Izuku stood upright, his face burning a shade of red that would put a fire truck to shame. Thank you. I'm so sorry. I was just nervous and my feet. It's okay. I'm super nervous too, she said, her smile genuine and disarming. Everyone is. It's the UA exam. Well, good luck in there. She gave him a small wave and hurried on ahead, disappearing into the stream of students. Izuku watched her go, his heart hammering for a completely different reason now. He had talked to a girl. A very nice girl. He slapped his burning cheeks, trying to regain his composure. Focus, Midoriya. As he stood there, another figure shouldered past him, radiating an aura of blistering, arrogant confidence. Katsuki Bakugo. He had grown taller over the past 10 months, his shoulders broader, but his expression was the same old sneer. His crimson eyes swept over Izuku, and for a moment, they widened in surprise. The analytical gaze of a born fighter took in the changes. The wiry muscle, the steady posture, the absence of the perpetual slouch. He saw not the cowering Deku he knew, but a stranger inhabiting his skin. Deku? Bakugo's voice was a low growl of disbelief. He looked Izuku up and down again, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. What the hell are you doing here? Did you come to watch? Izuku's first instinct was to flinch, to stammer an apology for existing. But the memory of All Might's words, of the pristine beach, of the power humming in his gut, held him steady. He met Bakugo's gaze and, for the first time, didn't look away. I'm here to take the exam, Kakin, he said. His voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. Bakugo's eyes narrowed, searching for the punchline, for the trick. He found none. Just a calm, unnerving resolve, with a disgusted TCH. He stalked off, muttering about quirkless freaks with delusions of grandeur. Izuku watched him go, his hands clenched into fists. It wasn't fear he felt, but a simmering determination. I'm not the same person you remember, Kakin. I'm not here to be a victim. I'm here to compete. The written exam was held in a cavernous lecture hall, the silence broken only by the scratching of hundreds of pencils. For Izuku, this was the easy part. For years, his mind had been his only refuge, his only tool. He had spent countless hours studying, analyzing, and dissecting heroes, quirks, and the very laws that govern their society. The questions on the page, ranging from complex physics problems to ethical hero law, were familiar territory. He moved through the test with a quiet, efficient focus, his brain a well-oiled machine. It was a comfort to know that, in this arena at least, he was already strong. After the written portion, the examinees were herded into an even larger auditorium, the air buzzing with nervous energy. The lights dimmed, and a massive screen lit up behind a stage. What's up, UA candidates? Welcome to today's live performance. A voice boomed through the speakers, so loud it vibrated in Izuku's bones. On stage, bathed in a spotlight, was the voice hero, Present Mike. He was a whirlwind of leather, blonde hair, and sonic energy. Everybody say hey. Silence. Izuku, a lifelong hero fanboy, felt a brief urge to scream HEY at the top of his lungs, but he managed to restrain himself. Present Mike launched into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. They would be sent into massive, simulated cityscapes. The objective was to score points by disabling robotic villains, each worth a different point value, 1, 2, or 3 points depending on their difficulty. Izuku's analytical mind immediately went to work, his muttering habit kicking in under his breath. Okay, so 3 robot types. A tiered point system. It's like a video game. The 1-pointers will be numerous but weak, cannon fodder. The 3-pointers will be tougher, probably requiring more power or a specific strategy, drawing a lot of attention. The optimal strategy would be to find a dense area of 1 and 2-pointers. Avoid the big fights over the 3-pointers and rack up a steady, high score through efficiency. And excuse me, may I ask a question? A loud, crisp voice cut through the auditorium. A few rows ahead, a tall, broad-shouldered young man with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, pointing at the exam pamphlet. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed, not 3. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame upon a prestigious institution such as UA, he declared, his arm chopping the air with formal precision. Furthermore, you with the curly green hair, Izuku froze. The spotlight of attention swung to him. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this exam seriously, then you should leave. Izuku clamped his hands over his mouth, his face turning crimson as students around him snickered. Sorry, he squeaked. Present Mike, unfazed, grinned. All right, examinee 7111, thanks for the call-in. The 4th robot type is the zero-pointer. It's an arena trap, a massive obstacle to be avoided. It's worth 0 points, so there's no reason to engage it. Think of it as a gimmick. That's all I got for ya. I'll leave my listeners with our school motto. As General Napoleon Bonaparte once said, a true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. Go beyond. Plus ultra. As the students were dismissed to their assigned battle centers, Izuku couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment. But his analytical mind was already moving past it, latching onto the information. A zero-pointer, an obstacle. So it's not just about combat prowess. It's about situational awareness and resource management. Don't waste time or energy on something with no reward. Got it, he gave a determined nod. He had a plan. Battle Center B was a sprawling, awe-inspiring cityscape of concrete and steel. Buildings scraped the sky, a perfect replica of a downtown district, albeit an eerily empty one. Izuku stood before massive gates, surrounded by other hopefuls. He saw the friendly girl from the entrance, now stretching her legs. He saw the formal, bespectacled boy, doing brisk warm-up lunges. He saw 100 other kids, all buzzing with nervous energy, their quirks practically leaking from their skin, sparks from one boy's fingers, another girl's skin turning a rocky gray. Izuku remained still. He reached into his satchel and retrieved a small, unassuming steel ingot. Unwrapping it, he popped it into his mouth like a piece of hard candy. Several nearby students gave him looks of disgust and confusion. Is that guy eating a block of metal? Someone whispered. Weirdo. Izuku ignored them. He crunched down, the sound sharp and loud in the tense silence. The familiar, wonderful taste filled his mouth, and the warmth in his gut flared, stoking the furnace from a pilot light to a low, steady burn. He felt energy flow through his limbs. He was fueled up and ready. All right, start. President Mick's voice blared from unseen speakers. Everyone looked around in confusion. What's the matter? There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run! Run! That was the signal. While the other students were still processing the announcement, Izuku's body, honed by 10 months of immediate reaction training with all might, exploded into motion. He was the first one through the gates, his sneakers pounding against the pavement as he sprinted into the mock city. That kid's got the right idea! President Mick's voice commentated. Izuku didn't look back. He rounded the first corner and came face to face with his first opponent. A 1-point robot, a green, one-wheeled machine with a single red optic, whirred towards him. Time seemed to slow. Okay, first test. Don't overdo it. Be efficient. He didn't break stride. As the robot closed in, he focused his quirk. A shimmering, gunmetal gray layer of overlapping scales flowed over his right arm, solidifying into a thick, brutalist gauntlet. Iron Dragon's Club! He grunted. He swung his armored fist in a powerful, rising arc. There was no clean explosion, no flashy energy blast. There was just a hideous, visceral crunch of tearing metal. His fist ripped through the robot's chassis, shattering its internal components and silencing its red eye. He didn't stop to admire his work, pulling his arm free and continuing his sprint deeper into the city. 1 point. A cacophony of explosions, crashes, and shouts erupted behind him as the other examinees finally entered the fray. Izuku ignored it, his focus absolute. He found a street teeming with 1 and 2 pointers. 2 1-pointers and a larger, bipedal 2-pointer swiveled to face him. Targets acquired. Eliminate. One of them droned. They charged. Izuku planted his feet. He took a deep, controlled breath, the energy in his core coiling in his chest. Iron Dragon's roar! He unleashed the attack not as a focus beam, but as a wide, conical blast, just as he practiced on the beach. It was a veritable storm of razor-sharp iron flechettes that shot from his mouth. The shotgun-like spray shredded the two one-pointers, their thin armor peeling back like tinfoil. The two-pointer, with its heavier plating, weathered the initial blast but was knocked off balance, its sensors riddled with shrapnel. Before it could recover, Izuku was on it. He coated both fists in his scales and unleashed a flurry of brutal, bludgeoning blows, smashing its joints and crushing its torso until it collapsed into a heap of sparking scrap. 4 more points. Total of 5. This became his rhythm. He was a whirlwind of brutal, brawling efficiency. He wasn't a flashy fighter. He was a ground-based engine of destruction, a one-man demolition crew. He sprinted through the streets, his senses on high alert, seeking out clusters of low and mid-tier robots. He used his roar for crowd control, his club for single-target demolition, and his scales for defense, letting the clumsy attacks of the robots clang harmlessly off his armored skin. After a particularly intense skirmish that netted him another 6 points, he felt the energy in his gut begin to wane. The furnace needed more fuel. He ducked into an alleyway, ripped a twisted steel strut from the chassis of a robot he just destroyed, and bit off a chunk. The raw, gritty taste was a welcome jolt to his system. Holy crap! Izuku turned. A boy with extendable earlobes was staring at him from the other end of the alley, his face a mask of horrified awe. You're eating the robot. Izuku, his mouth half full of metal, could only offer a weak, metallic-tasting smile before sprinting off in the other direction, leaving the other boy to question his sanity. He lost track of time, lost track of his own score. All that mattered was the fight, the rhythm of consume and destroy. He was in his element, a dragon in a forest of steel. He felt powerful. He felt alive. He was just about to engage another two-pointer when the ground began to tremble. It was a deep, rhythmic tremor that grew stronger with each passing second. Thump. 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 A collective gasp rose from the examinees across the city. Buildings began to crumble. A shadow fell over the entire street as something colossal rose from behind the skyline. It was the zero-pointer. It was a monster. A true titan of metal and wiring. A walking skyscraper that dwarfed the tallest buildings in the mock city. Its single, glowing red eye scanned the battlefield, and its massive arms, each the size of a bus, swept aside entire concrete structures as if they were made of cardboard. Panic erupted. It's the zero-pointer! Run! We can't fight that thing! Examinees who had been fighting with fierce determination moments before turned and fled, a tide of humanity flowing away from the mechanical god. Izuku, his mind screaming the same thing, turned to join them. Avoid it. It's an obstacle. No points. He started to run, but a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. Ow! It was a small, pained cry, almost lost in the chaos. Izuku's head snapped towards the source. Lying trapped under a pile of fallen concrete, directly in the path of the advancing zero-pointer, was the nice girl with the gravity quirk. One of the robot's flailing attacks had brought down a wall, and her leg was pinned beneath a massive slab. The world seemed to slow to a crawl. He saw her panicked, tear-filled eyes. He saw the colossal foot of the zero-pointer rising, preparing to take its next step, a step that would crush her into oblivion. He saw the other students running past, their own survival their only concern. He saw the pro-heroes on the observation towers, ready to intervene but not acting yet, because this, too, was part of the test. All Might's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if he were standing right next to him. A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. There was no thought. There was no hesitation. There was only a singular, burning imperative that eclipsed everything else. Save her. His legs were moving before he made a conscious decision. He sprinted not away from the danger, but directly towards it, towards the girl, towards the towering metal behemoth. The furnace in his gut was burning low. A club wouldn't scratch it. A roar would be like spitting in the wind. He needed more power. He needed better fuel. While running at full tilt, he ripped his satchel open. His hand closed around the smooth, heavy weight of his last resort, his best fuel. A bar of pure, high-carbon steel. He shoved the entire ingot into his mouth, his jaw muscles straining. Crunch! The sound was like a gunshot. A jolt ran through his entire skull, but his teeth held. He bit down again, shattering the ingot into manageable fragments. He swallowed, and the effect was instantaneous and explosive. It was like pouring gasoline onto a bonfire. A blinding, white-hot energy erupted from his stomach, surging through his veins with an almost painful intensity. The low warmth became a raging inferno. He could feel the power thrumming under his skin, begging to be released. He was overcharged, running at 200%. His analytical mind, supercharged by the energy, assessed the situation in a microsecond. Blunt force is useless. The armor is too thick. I can't lift the rubble in time. I need to stop the robot. Not destroy it, just stop it. A single, focused, piercing attack. A weak point. The torso probably houses the central processor and power core. If I can destabilize it. He didn't just coat his arm in scales. He commanded the power to reshape it. He poured every ounce of the inferno raging inside him into his right arm. The shimmering scales flowed and merged, grinding against each other with the sound of 1,000 shifting gears. They didn't form a club. They extended, twisted, and sharpened, the metal groaning under the strain of the transformation. His arm became a long, brutal, 3-foot spear of jagged, overlapping steel, tapering to a viciously sharp, drill-like point. It was not a weapon of elegance. It was a tool of pure, unadulterated piercing power. Iron Dragon's Lance! He screamed, his voice raw with power. He didn't slow. Using the last of his momentum, he launched himself off a piece of rubble, rocketing into the air towards the zero-pointer's torso. He was a human missile, a steel-tipped projectile aimed at the heart of a god of metal. For a fleeting moment, he locked eyes with the girl on the ground. He saw her look of utter terror morph into one of stunned disbelief. Then he hit. The impact was deafening, a calamitous screech of tortured metal that echoed through the entire battle center. The lance, powered by Izuku's supercharged quirk, did not shatter. It held. It bit into the robot's thick chassis, and with a final, desperate roar, Izuku pushed. It was like drilling through solid rock. Sparks flew in a blinding shower. Armor plating, inches thick, buckled, groaned, and then tore apart. The lance plunged deeper and deeper into the robot's torso, shredding internal wiring, rupturing power conduits, and destabilizing its massive gyroscope. The robot's single red eye flickered. It shuddered, a deep, groaning sound emanating from its core. Its advance halted. It froze, a statue of imminent destruction. Izuku, his arms still embedded in the machine, hung there for a second before yanking it free. The lance deconstructed, the metal flowing back into his skin, leaving his arm red, raw, and steaming. The inferno inside him was gone, replaced by an aching, terrifying void. He had used it all, every last drop. He fell. The 15-story drop felt like an eternity. His vision grayed out. The world became a distant, muffled roar. At least, she's safe. Just before he hit the ground, a sharp slap to his cheek brought him back to a sliver of consciousness. The girl was there, her hand on him. The rubble that had trapped her was floating harmlessly to the side. She had freed herself, and was now saving him. "Release!" she cried, and just before he could be crushed, her quirk nullified his own weight and momentum, allowing him to land with a gentle, jarring thud. The buzzer sounded, its shrill cry signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay on the pavement, his body screaming in protest. The world was a blurry, swimming mess. He had no fuel, no energy. The familiar, dreaded cold was beginning to creep back into the edges of his bones. He pushed himself up onto one elbow and looked at the girl. "Are you okay?" he managed to rasp. She was crying, looking between him and the now powering down zero-pointer with wide, grateful eyes. You saved me." Izuku gave a weak, exhausted smile before his head fell back against the concrete, the darkness finally taking him. He woke to the gentle scent of antiseptic. He was on a cot in a brightly lit room. An old woman in a lab coat with her gray hair in a tight bun kissed him on the forehead. A sudden wave of vitality washed over him, mending his strained muscles and soothing the raw ache in his arm. "All right, dearie, you're all topped up," Recovery Girl said, handing him a packet of gummy bears. "You gave us all quite a show. Your quirk uses up your own energy reserves at a dangerous rate. You were suffering from extreme metabolic exhaustion. Be more careful." Later, sitting in the auditorium and waiting for the results, Izuku was a wreck. He had no idea what his final score was. He'd spent the last few minutes of the exam unconscious. What if his rampage hadn't been enough? What if saving that girl cost him his dream? The results flashed up on the big screen. He scanned the list, his heart in his throat. He couldn't find his name. His spirit sank. He'd failed. "And now, for a breakdown of the scores." Present Mick's voice boomed. "Villain points are one thing, but this is UA. How could a hero school reject someone who saves others? That's not a test you can just ace with your fists. That's right, we also have rescue points." The screen changed, showing a clip of Izuku's desperate charge, of him creating the lance, of him piercing the zero-pointer. "Izuku Midoriya!" Present Mike screamed. "Villain points, 45. But for your act of selfless, incredible heroism in the face of overwhelming danger, you've earned 60 rescue points, for a grand total of 105, putting you in first place." The auditorium was silent for a beat, then erupted into whispers. Izuku stared at the screen, his name and score glowing like a supernova. First place. He had not only passed, he had excelled beyond his wildest dreams. The girl he saved, Achiko Uraraka, as he now saw on the board, who had also passed, was looking at him from across the room, a brilliant smile on her face. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He clenched his fist, the feeling of solid strength, of a victory earned, coursing through him. The iron gates of UA were open. He had done it. His journey was just beginning. The letter from Ye Hai had arrived a week after the exam. It was not a simple piece of paper, but a small, high-tech disc that projected a hologram of All Might himself. In his booming, heroic voice, he had congratulated Izuku on his spectacular performance, replaying the clip of his zero-pointer takedown with dramatic flair. He had praised not just the raw power Izuku had displayed, but the heroic instinct that had driven him to act. The pride in his mentor's voice was a warmth that rivaled the furnace of his own quirk. His mother Inko had wept uncontrollably, her tears a mixture of overwhelming pride and profound relief. For 15 years she had watched her son struggle against a world that had labeled him broken, her heart aching with a helplessness she could never show him. Seeing him in his new UA uniform, a crisp, gray blazer that fit his newly toned frame perfectly, was the culmination of a silent prayer she had held for over a decade. Now, standing before the ridiculously oversized door of Class 1A, Izuku felt a tremor of the old anxiety return. This was it. The inner sanctum. Beyond this door were 19 other students who had proven themselves to be the best of the best, prodigies with powerful quirks and years of experience using them. He, on the other hand, was a novice, a boy who had only discovered his own power 10 months ago in a junkyard. He took a steadying breath, his hand resting on the cool metal of his satchel. Inside, nestled beside his new textbooks, was a specially designed, lead-lined lunchbox. Yairo Zumomo, the brilliant recommendation student he had met briefly during orientation, had been fascinated by the biological requirements of his quirk. Upon learning about his diet, she had, with an almost terrifying level of enthusiasm, designed and created the lunchbox for him using her quirk. It was segmented into compartments containing various high-purity metal alloys, each labeled with its properties: high-carbon steel for strength, titanium alloy for speed, tungsten carbide for defense. She had called it a nutritionally complete metallurgic bento. He was still getting used to the idea of having friends. He pushed the colossal door open. The classroom was already buzzing with activity. He saw the formal, bespectacled boy from the exam gesticulating wildly, and the cheerful, brown-haired girl, Achiko Uraraka, talking with a girl with pink skin and antennae. His eyes scanned the room, and then they locked onto a familiar, explosive blonde spiky haircut. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk, the very picture of arrogant disdain. He looked bored, annoyed, and utterly contemptuous of everyone around him. And then he saw Izuku. Bakugo's feet slammed to the floor with a loud bang that silenced the room. Every head turned towards the door. His crimson eyes, which had widened in brief surprise at the gate, now narrowed into slits of pure, unadulterated fury. He didn't just look angry. He looked personally, mortally offended by Izuku's very presence. He stormed across the classroom, the floor seeming to vibrate with his rage. He grabbed the front of Izuku's new blazer, his knuckles white. "Deku!" he snarled, his voice a low, dangerous crackle. "What the hell are you doing here? This isn't some goddamn charity program for quirkless freaks. How did you cheat your way in?" The old Izuku would have dissolved into a puddle of stammering apologies. But 10 months of hauling scrap metal, of shattering concrete with his bare hands, and of All Might's unwavering belief had forged something new inside him. A spine of steel. He met Bakugo's glare without flinching. "I didn't cheat, Kaken," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He gently but purposefully pried Bakugo's fingers from his jacket. "I passed the exam, just like everyone else." Bakugo was so taken aback by the lack of fear, by the simple act of defiance, that he was momentarily speechless. He had expected cowering, not composure. "Passed?" he finally spat, his voice dripping with venom. "How? What did you do? You're quirkless. I've known you my whole life. You were a pebble on the side of the road. I was wrong," Izuku said, the words simple but carrying the weight of a lifetime. "My quirk, it was just dormant. It manifested late." This was, to Bakugo, the ultimate betrayal. For years he had built his identity on the foundation of his own innate superiority, with Deku as the constant, quirkless benchmark against which he measured his greatness. The idea that Deku had a power, that he had been hiding it, was an assault on the very core of his worldview. It wasn't just that Deku was no longer beneath him. It was the horrifying possibility that Deku had been lying to him, mocking him in secret all this time. "You were lying," Bakugo hissed, small, sharp explosions beginning to pop in his palm. "All this time you had a power, and you let me think. You were laughing at me behind my back, you damn nerd. If you're just here to make friends, then you can pack up your stuff and leave." A new voice, dry and utterly devoid of energy, cut through the tension like a razor. Everyone turned to see a man lying on the floor behind the teacher's desk, cocooned in a yellow sleeping bag like a morbid caterpillar. He slowly unzipped the bag and rose to his feet, a man with tired, bloodshot eyes, a mess of black hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf wrapped around his neck. "Welcome to UA's hero course," he said, taking a long sip from a juice pouch. He looked as though he hadn't slept in a week. "It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You can't afford to waste it on pointless posturing." He introduced himself as Shota Aizawa, their homeroom teacher. Without any further ceremony, he tossed a bundle of blue gym uniforms onto his desk. "Change into these and meet me on the P grounds." Immediately, the P grounds were vast, a collection of tracks, fields, and specialized training areas under the bright morning sun. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in a nervous line, clad in their new UA tracksuits. "A quirk assessment test?" Uraraka asked, echoing the confusion of the entire class. "But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Here at UA, we're not bound by silly traditions," Aizawa said, his tone flat. "You've all been doing these kinds of tests your whole lives. The 50-meter dash, the long jump, grip strength. But you've never been allowed to use your quirks. That's irrational. The Ministry of Education is run by bureaucrats who refuse to modernize." He turned his tired, penetrating gaze on Bakugo. "Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam for the entrance test. In middle school, what was your best result for the softball throw?" Bakugo's ever-present scowl deepened slightly. 67 meters. Try it with your quirk," Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Bakugo strode into the throwing circle, a wicked grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm, a familiar, predatory energy building around him. With a guttural roar of "Dii!" he hurled the ball. The throw was punctuated by a massive explosion that blasted from his palm, propelling the ball forward with the force of a cannon. It sailed through the air, a tiny white speck against the blue sky, leaving a trail of smoke in its wake. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped, and he showed the screen to the class. 705.2 meters. A wave of excited murmurs swept through the students. Wow! 705 meters? That's insane! We can use our quirks for real! This is gonna be awesome! This is what the hero course is all about! Awesome, you say? Aizawa's voice was suddenly cold, cutting through the excitement like a winter wind. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. You think this is a game? You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think it's all going to be fun and games? Idiots! A grim, unsettling smile stretched across his face. Today, you will compete in 8 physical tests to gauge your potential, and whoever comes in last place will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled on the spot. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic ripped through the class. Expelled? The entire class shouted in unison. But it's the first day. That's not fair. Uraraka protested. Natural disasters, highway pileups, rampaging villains. Calamity is always unfair. Aizawa retorted, his gaze sweeping over their terrified faces. It's a hero's job to combat that unfairness. If you were expecting a friendly school orientation, you're in the wrong place. For the next 3 years, Yui will do everything it can to put you through the ringer. This is plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. He pushed his goggles over his eyes. The demonstration is over. Now the real thing begins. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. Expulsion. On the first day. This was a crucible. Aizawa wasn't just testing their quirks. He was testing their nerve, their ability to perform under extreme pressure. He looked down at his hands. They were steady. He had faced down a 50-foot robot to get here. He wouldn't be sent home now. Test 1, 50-meter dash. The first event was a straightforward sprint. Izuku was paired against a boy with frog-like features and a girl with long, dark green hair. As the starting pistol fired, the frog boy, Tsuyu Ajui, leaped forward in powerful, bounding hops. Izuku focused. Titanium alloy for speed and efficiency. He didn't have a mobility quirk like some of the others, but he could augment what he had. He channeled his power to his legs, a thin, shimmering layer of iron dragon scales flowing over his calves and thighs. It wasn't for defense. He kept the layer razor thin, shaping it to reinforce his muscle groups, turning his legs into powerful pistons. He burst from the starting line, his strides powerful and explosive. The metal reinforcement allowed him to push off the ground with far more force than normal, each step covering more ground. He wasn't as fast as the engine-legged Tenya Ida, who cleared the distance in just over 3 seconds, or Bakugo, who used his explosions for rocket-like propulsion. But he was fast. He crossed the line in 5.49 seconds, a solid, respectable time that placed him firmly in the middle of the pack. It wasn't spectacular, but it was far from last. Test 2, grip strength. This was more his territory. He stepped up to the dynamometer, a small device that measured grip strength. He took a moment to subtly pop a small, dense tungsten carbide ball bearing into his mouth from a hidden pocket in his sleeve, crunching down on it. A jolt of dense, solidifying energy flowed into his arm. He wrapped his hand around the device, coating his palm and fingers in a thick layer of iron dragon scales. He squeezed. The device's internal mechanisms groaned in protest. The digital display climbed rapidly, flickering past 200, 300, 400 kilograms. It finally stopped with a sharp crack as the internal spring gave out. Aizawa glanced at the broken device, then at Izuku. The reading was frozen at 540 kilograms. Not bad, he grunted, making a note on his data pad. Izuku had beaten the 8-armed Mizo Shoji, who had been the previous record holder. He felt a small, fierce spark of satisfaction. Test 3, standing long jump. Izuku cleared the sandbox easily, using the same leg reinforcement technique from the sprint. Again, a solid but not top-tier performance. He was holding his own, building a steady foundation of scores. He noticed Aizawa watching him intently after each test, his tired eyes analytical, trying to piece together the mechanics of his strange quirk. Test 4, repeated side steps. His agility was decent, augmented by the quick application of his scales to his joints for stability. He watched as a small, purple-haired boy named Mineta bounced between the lines at impossible speeds on a bed of his sticky purple balls, and knew he couldn't compete with the more esoteric quirks. He just focused on doing his personal best. He was consistently in the upper middle range. Safe from expulsion, but not standing out. He knew he needed a showstopper, a moment to prove that he truly belonged in the top tier, to justify his first-place score in the entrance exam. His chance came with the softball throw. Test 5, softball throw. Uraraka stepped up to the circle. With a light touch, she activated her zero-gravity quirk on the ball and tossed it gently. It floated upwards, rising and rising until it disappeared from sight. Aizawa's device beeped. Infinity. The class erupted. Infinity? Izuku smiled. Uraraka had found the perfect, logical application of her quirk to the problem. It was brilliant. Now it was his turn. He walked into the circle, the familiar weight of the softball in his hand. He looked across the field, his mind racing. He could coat his arm in scales, reinforce his muscles, and throw it with superhuman strength. That would get him a good score, probably over 100 meters. But that wasn't enough. That was thinking like a brawler. All Might's words came back to him. Your will must be the hammer that shapes the iron of your quirk. He needed to think bigger. He needed to be creative. He looked at the ball, then at the open air before him. He remembered Bakugo's throw. It wasn't just the strength of his arm. It was the explosive propulsion. He couldn't create explosions, but he could create a different kind of propulsion. A wave of force. He planted his feet, his stance wide and solid. He took another one of his snacks, a good-sized piece of high-carbon steel, and chewed it down, feeling the furnace inside him roar to life. He held the ball not like he was going to throw it, but cradled in his open palm, presented before his face. What's he doing? Someone whispered. Is he gonna headbutt it? Izuku ignored them. He took a deep, shuddering breath, drawing all the power he had just consumed up from his core, into his chest, coiling it in his lungs. This was going to be the strongest one yet. Not the widest, not the most piercing, but the most powerful. He focused on a single point far down the field, visualizing a torrent of energy flowing towards it. He opened his mouth and screamed, Iron Dragon's Roar! It was not the shotgun blast he'd used in the exam. It was a focused, deafening torrent of wind and razor-sharp iron particles, a jet engine of pure, concussive force. The sound was immense, a grating, high-pitched shriek of metal tearing itself apart that made the other students flinch back and cover their ears. The air in front of him shimmered and distorted with the sheer power of the blast. And the ball, caught in the very center of this maelstrom, was not just thrown, it was carried. It shot forward like a bullet from a railgun, riding the wave of metallic fury. It became a white blur, streaking across the sky at an incredible velocity, leaving a shimmering trail of iron dust in its wake. It flew on, long after the sound of his roar had faded, finally arcing back down to earth so far away it was barely visible. Silence. The entire class, including Aizawa, stared downfield, then back at Izuku, who was panting heavily, his throat raw, a thin trail of smoke curling from his lips. Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up, his expression unreadable behind his goggles. 704.5 meters, just shy of Bakugo's score. But achieved in a completely different, utterly terrifying way. A slow grin spread across the face of a red-haired boy with sharp teeth. Whoa, that was so manly! He exclaimed, breaking the silence. The rest of the class erupted into a buzz of awe and confusion. What even is his quirk? Did he just scream that ball across the field? He's the one who took out the zero-pointer. It makes sense now. Izuku felt a surge of pride. He had done it. He had shown them a glimpse of his true power. He looked over at Bakugo. The look on his rival's face was not one of simple anger. It was a complex, toxic brew of disbelief, fury, and something that looked almost like fear. His hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, and a low, guttural growl was emanating from his throat. The foundation of his world was not just cracked, it was shattering before his eyes. The rest of the tests passed in a blur. Izuku performed well, his confidence bolstered. He finished the sit-ups, seated toe touch, and long-distance run with solid, augmented scores, never placing at the top but always far from the bottom. Finally, Aizawa projected the final rankings onto a holographic screen. Izuku scanned the list, his breath held. 1. Yairo Zumomo. 2. Todoroki Shoto. 3. Bakugo Katsuki. 4. Ida Tenya. 5. Midoriya Izuku. 5th place. He was in the top 5. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. He had not only survived, he had thrived. His gaze dropped to the bottom of the list. 20. Mineta Minoru. The small, purple-haired boy let out a wail of despair, tears streaming down his face. And I was lying, Aizawa said, deactivating the hologram. The entire class froze. No one's going home. Silence, then an outcry of disbelief. It was a logical deception, Aizawa said with a shrug, his grim smile returning. It was meant to draw out your full potential by putting you under maximum pressure. Yairo Zumomo, the brilliant girl who had placed first, seemed to be the only one unsurprised. Of course it was a ruse, she said calmly. It was rather obvious if you thought about it. Izuku and several others stared at her, dumbfounded. It had not been obvious at all. As Aizawa dismissed the class, Izuku felt a profound sense of accomplishment. He had been tested against the best and had proven he belonged. He had made a statement. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Ida Tenya, the formal boy from the orientation. Midoriya-kun, he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. I must apologize for my behavior during the presentation. You correctly deduced the true nature of the practical exam, while I did not. And your performance today, that final throw, was a magnificent and unexpected application of your quirk. You are clearly a superior candidate. I was wrong about you, he bowed stiffly. Izuku, flustered, bowed back. Oh no, it's okay. I was just muttering, it was rude of me. Before he could continue, a shadow fell over them. Bakugo was standing there, his face a mask of cold, repressed rage. His crimson eyes were fixed on Izuku, ignoring Ida completely. We need to talk, Bakugo growled, his voice dangerously low. He jerked his head towards the school building entrance. Now, Izuku's newfound confidence wavered. This was a different kind of anger than the loud, explosive fury he was used to. This was colder, deeper. He nodded, gave a hesitant apology to Ida, and followed Bakugo around the side of the building, his heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against his ribs. They stopped in a secluded area between the gym and the main building. Bakugo spun around, his whole body trembling with a barely contained seismic rage. What the hell was that? He demanded, his voice a strained whisper that was more menacing than any shout. That power! The shrapnel! The scales! Where did you get it? Who gave it to you? You're a goddamn quirkless Deku. You can't have a power like that. I told you, Kaken. It was always there. I just didn't know how to use it, Izuku said, trying to keep his voice steady. Liar! Bakugo roared, finally losing his composure. An explosion erupted from his palm, blasting a small crater in the wall next to Izuku's head. You think I'm stupid? I've been watching you my whole life. You were a useless, clumsy, crying little freak who couldn't do anything right. And now you show up with a quirk stronger than mine? It's impossible. You've been hiding it. You've been looking down on me, laughing at me, this whole time. Izuku looked at Bakugo, and for the first time, he didn't just see a bully. He saw a terrified, insecure boy whose entire identity had just been ripped out from under him. Bakugo's greatness was absolute in his own mind, and Izuku's power was a variable he couldn't compute. It broke the equation of his life. I would never laugh at you, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice softening. You've always been amazing. You've always been my image of victory. I was never looking down on you. I was always looking up to you. The sincerity in Izuku's voice seemed to throw Bakugo off even more than defiance would have. His rage faltered, replaced by a raw, snarling confusion. Then what is this? He demanded, gesturing wildly at Izuku. What are you? I'm someone who's finally learned how to stand on my own feet, Izuku replied. He looked Bakugo straight in the eye, his own gaze hardening with a resolve he didn't know he possessed. I'm not the useless Deku you remember. I'm here to be a hero. And that means I'm not going to be your punching bag anymore. He squared his shoulders. You're amazing, Kakin. You're strong, and you'll be a great hero. But so will I. I'm not beneath you. I'm your classmate. And from now on, I'm your rival. The word hung in the air between them, charged and dangerous. Rival. It was a declaration of equality. It was a challenge. Bakugo stared at him, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. His world had been turned upside down, and the person who did it was now standing before him, claiming to be his equal. He was trembling, not with rage anymore, but with a complex mix of emotions he couldn't process. Finally, he just scoffed, a bitter, broken sound. He turned his back on Izuku. Just stay the hell out of my way, he muttered before stalking off, his shoulders rigid, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Izuku watched him go, his own body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. He had done it. He had stood up to him. He hadn't won a fight, but he had won something far more important: Bakugo's grudging, infuriated acknowledgement that he was no longer irrelevant. The dynamic between them had been irrevocably shattered. The simple hierarchy of bully and victim was gone, burned away in the heat of their confrontation. In its place, something new and volatile had been forged. It was a rivalry born not of friendship or respect, but of history, anger, and a desperate, shared dream. And Izuku knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning.